Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Business of Business podcast, Two Daughters and Their Dad. I'm your host, Staci J. Dempsey. And thankfully, like always, I am here with the dad and the other daughter, Jennifer. And I was going to say the J word, but not today, to Dad. Good morning, good afternoon to the both of you.
Morning.
Hello. Hello.
By the way, listeners, the J word is Jack. So, not that Dad and I have a weird relationship because we don't, but in business, when we're working together, I typically refer to him as Jack, just so we're very clear. But outside of the office, he's always Dad. I don't call him and say, hey, Jack. So there's that. Let's clear that rumor up on the internet. It's one viral for sure. But good morning, good afternoon to all of our listeners, wherever you are tuning in today from. And we thought today would be a good time to talk about that we are heading into a presidential election season, and there can be differing views and opinions. And as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, what are our tools that we have to kind of navigate those feelings that now have become so much more prevalent in our workspace, in our businesses, and certainly online. As we were beginning to kind of brainstorm on this topic, Dad and Jennifer and I were thinking, at least when I was starting out working, who you voted for, your opinions, and even your views was really not something that you discussed where you worked. It was maybe something you talked about with close friends, your family, but it was not something that you discussed in the workplace. And it certainly was not something that you would post online. But now that world is very, very different. And with an upcoming election season, those topics can become very easily part of daily conversation inside our business. So I'm so interested to hear, Dad and Jennifer, kind of what maybe you guys have thought through or experienced that we can share with our listeners today about how to just navigate this season that we're getting ready to come into. So, Jen, do you have anything that comes to mind that you can share with our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as far back as I can remember inside of my business, I get it might have not been necessarily touched on or talked a whole lot about, but you knew that there was kind of areas that you wanted to stay away from in the workplace. Now, in my business, in our culture agreement, we have a part about topics that we redirect from. So, you know, obviously politics is a big one, religion. We don't want to be in the salon gossiping. And I don't know if you guys have ever been in a hair salon, but talking is what we do every single day. And we have these amazing relationships with our clients. And so, me personally, I learned so much from having this opportunity to talk to people every single day. Um, so much that I don't even really need to watch the news because everyone catches me up every single day. So, I'm just the type of person that I can respect people's views and opinions, even if they're different than mine. And I just try to be very careful to not share my views and my opinions with others. But I really do love hearing people's, viewpoints on these topics. But it's just something that we have to be so careful about. I am not going to make bold statements online around these topics. I think it's important for me, for myself, to be professional at all times, no matter what. So I'm just going to choose not to do any of that. Now, the last election that we had was pretty huge. And that's kind of what we were talking about before we hit record was, there's so much going on. It's so different. When I think back being in the hair salon, it has changed so much. And you can really see how people are very divided and really standing on what they believe in. And so I think what I've kind of learned from the last election is that I need to be ahead of it with my team um, as the season starts here to really say, hey, you know, we need to be professional and respectful at all times. This is not the right place or the right time to be diving into any of these topics. Um, but and as I think back, I don't even think, I think it's easy with clients that come into your business to listen to them. What was really hard for me was the actual employees inside of my business kind of battling that out. And to be honest, my approach was, obviously I set the tone, set the standard. I made myself very clear on where I stood, with, again, this is just not the right time or place. But there, things did happen, conversations happened, and I kind of, walked away from that and let these people work it out between themselves, and everything was fine. But I would be lying to tell you that there wasn't a level of tension inside of my business because of it. So I think now that it's coming around again for me, I just, again, want to make sure that I'm very clear with my team on my expectations around these topics, and just try and be respectful as possible when it comes to it. But yeah, it's a completely different time that we're in. I also think it's interesting because people kind of assume, they throw assumptions on me, like, because you're a business owner, I know you're going to vote this way. Because you're a woman, you're going to vote this way. And so, because, you have relationships with clients or customers that come inside of your business, it's easy to kind of fall into those traps. So I think my best piece of advice is just to be super aware that, that this is coming, it's going to happen, and even just kind of understanding what you're going to say to be able to redirect really seamlessly, and kind of, you know, surprisingly, when people kind of bring it up, because people say stuff to you and you're like, well, that came out of nowhere, right? So so I'm feeling like, business wise, I'm a little bit more prepared this season, only because I've had the experience of doing this once before.
Yeah, absolutely. And dad said something before we hit record that I think is really important to repeat. And do you remember what that was, Dad? You said so many good things, so
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm not sure which one of those good things you're talking about. No, but certainly the just trying to be a good listener is really um, my goal. If someone is wanting to try and engage me in conversation, it's really just to listen and then hopefully then redirect back to the purpose of the meeting, without engaging in too much, because again, not only can it just become, especially if you're not in particular agreement, with that opinion, it can be that, which can be problematic. But you also have just the time. It's like we're here to do a particular
yeah.
purpose for a meeting, and now we're off on this tangent that could go on for a long time. Um, so I'm not sure if that's what you were referring
Well,
to,
that was
but
definitely, yeah, that was, like I said, you said many good things, but and yeah, that is actually, that's a great tactic, and like I said, that is something that I personally have experienced in meetings with dad, where it's like, you're here for a purpose, doing business, working with a client, and you can just kind of feel like, oh boy, if we kind of engage in this, whether we agree or not, it's going to open a whole can of worms that not really prepared to do that right now. And so being able to kind of point back to having tactics like, okay, so let me just make sure I understand based on what we've talked about so far, because I don't want to lose, our purpose of this meeting. Definitely a toolbox for a lot of people. But also, I think the important thing to say is that at the end of the day, it's still your business, and you can choose, if you feel as though it is important for you to stand or say one particular way. At the end of the day, it's still your business, and it is your right to do what you want. I think, however, for the most part, most people, when it comes to we're working on our businesses, We're trying to serve people, we're trying to help people in some capacity, that is, these type of topics can get very strenuous and pull our focus away from what we're really trying to work on, with a client. And at least in my experience, and my experiences, in this area has been around nonprofit, has been in prior years to say, we understand that our executive director has very strong feelings, during, whatever election we were discussing. However, as a whole, posting these types of things online, again, while you are representing the organization, um, there has to be some level of, it's taking focus away from what we're trying, like the mission, because you are a representation of this organization. And so sometimes it's difficult because, again, people are allowed to feel what they want to feel. And it's your business. So you can still do whatever it is you want to do. But I think our whole purpose in this conversation is how do we use these tools to redirect people back to why we're, how we're trying to show up to serve them in some capacity. And so, Dad, over the years, has there been any other tools or tactics that maybe you've used, you know, whether in like inside of our business where, I can't particularly think of anything strong where, staff or teammates were viciously upset with each other. But also, is there anything that you can maybe think of that might be helpful to our listeners in that capacity?
Again, in our business, we're in a business where we have client relationships. We have, they have a, trust in us, from, the perspective of, being able to give them good counsel, good advice. And I think one of the challenges, if you're in that type of business, and very similar to what Jennifer experiences, where again, people are, there's an expectation of, communication and sharing, with the person who's doing your hair. I mean, it's just the way that whole culture is. And so it's easier, I think, for people to want to talk about, in the area of politics and kind of their views and, who they think, would be the best candidate and all those things. And I just think that, understanding, if you have a client that you've known from, I have clients that I've been around a long time and have very good relationships with, they're going to, I know that I can have a little bit of a conversation that, we're on the same page. But again, I think it's just a matter of really, we're not out there being prominent with our political views as a business. We don't take a stand because, Dempsey Weiss Associates is not just representing Dave Weiss and Jack Dempsey, it's representing a lot of people. And I certainly wouldn't want to make a political stand by, whether we post things on social media or whether we're, posting things around our office supporting particular candidates. We don't do that because I have no idea, where each one of my employees stand on these things. And I would not want to, have them think just because now I work for Dempsey Weiss and Associates, they're going to expect me to have that particular viewpoint. I want people to feel comfortable they can have their own viewpoint, and perspective on things. So it's just, but as you said, and we talked about earlier, but it's your business, so if that's what you choose to do, there shouldn't be anything stopping you from doing that either. That's just how we approach things, when it comes to, the area of politics specifically, because, these past, several years, politics has went from, issue, how do you, vote on issues to your voting. It's just become a whole, just kind of really challenging environment, with a lot of, really disdain for each candidate and so again, it's just, I believe as a business person and an entrepreneur, you're better off navigating away from that, in your business, and just staying focused on what you do. What you do is your business and staying really focused on that. So that would be kind of my approach.
That's a great point, Dad. That's actually a really great point that we had it kind of thought through, beforehand. Is that looking at a business that does, have a specific view, I'll say, or a specific stance, and having teammates again that you're depending on, that you're working with, you're coaching, you're building a culture that then as maybe the face of the organization being so vocal that now it might impart a feeling to those that you are working with, that's on your team, that somehow that representation is then shared on them or put on them, and how that might make them feel. We had kind of talked about that, but that's an excellent point, is that at the root of what we do, that's not the goal, right? The goal, that I wouldn't want someone to feel that way, that someone else would assume on our team that they feel that way also. So that's a great point. That's a really good point.
Well, the reason I bring that up too is because I know over the past few years, I mean, we're talking about politics, but I know there's been major companies that, have made prominent statements around social issues, and I know that I remember, one of the companies that we do business with had made, kind of lined up with a particular social issue, and and there was a lot of pushback on that from the people who were identifying themselves with that company, but they were identifying themselves not as an employee but as an independent contractor, because they had independent contractor status. And so there was a lot of pushback saying, I'm hanging your shingle out in front of my office. You're making that stand on social issues, which is not my viewpoint at all, or that's not my, how I feel. And so I don't want people thinking that
Right.
because I'm lined up with you as a company, that is how I feel about that particular issue. And so I think that, that's a valid point. I mean, as a company, now these are bigger companies, but as a bigger company, when you're lining up on those issues, you have to think about what that means down the line, because now you're attaching that to every single person that might have some, connection with your company. So again, I just think it's very important to be careful on how you navigate these things.
Yeah, excellent point. Excellent point.
I mean, I remember going to a back to school night for one of my kids.
The
This was
thousands of children that you have.
Yeah, well, right. But I remember walking into, it was a back to school night, and it was a high school, and you're meeting the teachers. It was a political season. And I remember walking into the social studies room, and the room was filled with stuff about one particular candidate. I mean, filled. And I'm looking around, and full disclaimer, I supported that candidate. I was in favor of that. But I'm sitting there thinking, this classroom, though, is paid. It's a public high school. It's paid by taxpayers. I mean, this teacher should not be, really promoting one political agenda, to high school kids, right? I mean, I just don't. And I said something to, the administration of the school. I don't think they had made him take it down, but I just said, I don't really think that's proper. That they are clearly in favor of one candidate over another, when this is, this is a public site paid by taxpayers who are on both sides of the equation. So again, I think another piece that, that I think we have to be careful with.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So Jen, any final thoughts before we kind of wrap this episode up on, this upcoming season and all of the things that we think are going to come along with it for, what's that?
You know what's so funny? I want our listeners to know that I don't watch football, right? I do not watch the Eagles. Eagles is very popular in where we live, right? But when football season comes on, it's important for me to know who won the football game. And then if the Eagles lost, I know that when I go out into the world, people are going to just be upset, irritable, maybe a little pissed off, right? So I'm prepared. And so when I go into my business, wow, did you see those Eagles last night? They did a great job. Or, oh my goodness, I can't believe they lost again. And we move on, right? That's a part of my job. I have to understand what's going on in football. So I say that to say, we talk about this on the podcast. It's important for us to know what season that we're going into. It's important for us to recognize what's going on in the world, just like when we talk about inflation when it comes to our business. So, even when the election is over, we are still going to deal with customers and clients that somebody's going to be irritable. And so the more that we can prepare ourselves to walk that out inside of our business, I think the better prepared we'll be and the more success we will have. So.
Well, that's a good point, Jen, because for whatever reason, I used to be a fairly avid, sports person following sports. And for whatever reason, I've I don't do that anymore. And I can't tell you how many times I've got caught on that to where, it's like, man, what'd you think of that game last night? I'm like, well, what do I say? I don't even know what game they're actually referring to. I'm assuming it's the Eagles. And then I don't even know who won. So, I just, so it's like, you got to be a little prepared. I've been caught flat-footed a few times on that one. So,
well, I think then we also can wrap this up with our nugget alert that Jennifer does not follow football, but will follow if the Eagles win or lose. So hopefully
support for Taylor's boyfriend. Let's put that out there too.
Okay. Well, I think that might be taking a side, Jennifer, which completely goes against what we all just talked about. But here, nevertheless, Taylor's boyfriend, Jennifer, has a preference. So with all of those wonderful things said, we hope that at least this conversation has been helpful to all of you in some way, shape, or form. And we will see you guys in our next episode.